In 1971, Hiro Nakamoto, who was 15 years old at the time, was at his grandparents' house in Kyoto, Japan for the weekend. Hito got bored and decided to go exploring in their attic. There were a lot of old, interesting things in his grandparents' attic from what he recalled. While he was in the attic, he happened upon an old, small wooden box. The box was locked, but Hito found a tool in the attic and managed to break the hinge on the box. Right as he opened the box, his grandfather happened to step into the attic and yelled at him in Japanese, "No Hito, don't open that box." As his grandfather yelled at him, a small Japanese doll dropped to the floor. Edo's grandfather rushed over to the doll, hurriedly picking it up and immediately putting it back into the box. Since the hinge was now broken, his grandfather ran downstairs, grabbed some tape, and wrapped the box with tape as many times as he could. The following story was told to Kido that day by his grandfather, Hiro Nakamoto. Hito has since written down the story his grandfather told him, and has appeared on numerous TV shows in Japan over the years, telling the story. As my grandfather was wrapping the box with tape, I asked him why he was so scared of the doll. He quickly looked up from what he was doing and gave me the coldest stare. I could vividly see the fear in his eyes and could see his hands were trembling. He continued wrapping the box in tape without saying a word. Once he finished wrapping the box, using up all the tape he had, he walked back up to the attic and came back 10 minutes later. When he came back, he put his hands on my shoulders, looked me in the eyes and said, "You must promise me never to open that box again, even when I'm dead. You must promise me, Guido. I'll leave strict instructions when I die as to what I want done with that doll." I responded back, "Yes, grandfather. Please tell me why, though." He then sat me down and told me a story that still gives me nightmares to this day. The year was 1906. I was 9 years old at the time and living in a small village called Hakodate on the island of Hokkaido. It was summertime, and a summer I'll never forget. The first girl in our village to disappear was around the beginning of June. I don't remember the exact date, but I remember it was starting to get hot. Everyone in the village searched and searched for the girl, but never turned up anything. Many people figured she'd run away because she was coming of age, and young people liked to leave our small village for the city once they reached a certain age. It wasn't until the second girl disappeared, people started to panic and talk of an Akuma doll. Demon dolls started coming up in conversations. I'll never forget the look of fear and dread on people's faces as I walked with my mother through the busy part of our village. Summertime in our village was supposed to be fun, filled with celebrations and festivals. But once several girls disappeared, everything was canceled and no one was to leave their house after dark. I remember our village sending one of the elders to go down to Tokyo to hire a special investigator to come assist with solving the disappearances. By the time the special investigator finally showed up, it was almost the end of July. By this time, 6 girls under the age of 14 had disappeared, the youngest being 10 years old. The investigator went house to house, questioning everybody and writing down detailed notes in a black journal he carried around. We were all in our living room when the investigator came to our house, which consisted of my parents and my little brother, Takashi, who was 6 years old at the time. The investigator asked both my parents many questions, specifically where they were at when the 6 girls had gone missing. My parents were persimmon farmers, so they never left our farm much except to go into the main part of the village from time to time to get supplies and things they needed for the farm. I remember my father asking the investigator if he had any ideas of what happened to the girls. The investigator replied, saying he had no ideas yet, and everyone in the village he'd questioned so far seemed to be innocent of any wrongdoing. The investigator stayed in town for about a month. Sometimes I'd see him questioning people, and sometimes I'd catch glimpses of him walking alone through the forest, looking down at the ground like he was searching for something. It wasn't until the middle of September that unimaginable horror struck our village. This was after the investigator had left, saying he'd searched the entire village and surrounding area and could find nothing. It was his belief the girls were kidnapped, taken far away, and sold into slavery. One thing we did notice was once the investigator showed up, girls stopped disappearing. So we believed his story, thinking it was kidnappers who were not from around here. Life went back to normal as well as it could, being that 6 families were now without their daughters, and there was no explanation as to what happened to them. I'll never forget that day in September, though it still haunts me to this day. Almost every village or city in Japan has a temple or shrine in it, where everyone goes to pray. My mother would give me a few coins every week to go to our village's temple, to pray and give thanks to the monks who lived in the temple. It had been quite some time since I'd been to the temple, ever since the disappearances started happening. My mother didn't want me going to the temple alone, or even with my little brother. I remember it was Sunday morning. I woke up to my mother coming into my room and saying, "I want you to go to the temple this morning and pray and give the monks some money." She handed me the money and went to the kitchen to cook breakfast. I decided I wanted to hurry and get it over with before breakfast was ready, so I hurried, put on my clothes and sandals, and took off for the temple. The temple wasn't too far away from our house, maybe a kilometer. I would always walk a bit and run a bit. This made it easier for me and less boring. As the temple came into sight through the thick bamboo forest, I remember feeling a quiet eeriness. The temple looked empty, which was strange because I was used to seeing several monks outside, cleaning or preparing food. On this day, though, there was no one to be seen. I figured they were inside, eating, and I proceeded to walk up to the temple. As I was walking up to the main set of stairs, a putrid smell hit me right in the face. I started dry heaving and almost vomited. I put my hand over my nose and proceeded to walk inside. As I walked inside, I said in a low voice, "Excuse me, excuse me," but there was no reply. I proceeded to walk further into the temple, and as I did, I heard some loud rustling coming from under the tatami mats that covered the temple's floor. I immediately froze in place, and a great sense of fear struck me. I stood there for a while, afraid to move a muscle, when again I heard the rustling from under the tatami mats. It was then a thought entered my mind that maybe it was just a tanuki Japanese raccoon, as we had a lot of them running around the area. I let out a sigh of relief, and the fear I'd been feeling receded. I knelt down on the tatami mats to lift it up, to see if it was, in fact, a tanuki. As I was lifting up the mat, the putrid smell overcame me again. As I looked down under the mat, I could see the naked body of a young girl. It was a girl, but each body part was from a different person. The head, arms, legs, and torso looked like they'd been sewn together to create one whole person. What frightened me the most was what was sitting on top of the girl's body. It was a doll, and it was looking straight up at me. I would bet my life on the fact I saw the doll blink at me as I stared at it. I immediately fell back, stumbling across the tatami mats. I didn't see anyone along the road as I ran home, and I never ran so fast in all my life. When I made it home, my mother was outside, shaking out a rug. She could tell something was very wrong, which caused her to drop the rug and run up to me. I only remember bits and pieces of what happened the rest of the day, as I think I was in shock. I must have told them what I saw because my father quickly took off, running to the main part of the village to round up help and head back to the temple. My mother had me go inside and lay down for the remainder of the day. I do remember there being a lot of people over at my house, but only one visitor came to my room to talk to me. It was the oldest lady in the village. I'll never forget what she told me and the promise I made to her. She told me it was an Akuma doll I saw on top of the girl's body. It had killed the 6 girls and sewed pieces of them together. The doll was creating a body for herself, taking a piece from each of the girls' bodies, totaling 6 pieces. She said this doll in particular is hundreds of years old and had been locked away in the temple, but somehow managed to get out of the place. The monks had been keeping her. She said it was her duty now to keep the doll locked up in a safe place, since the monks from the temple had mysteriously vanished. She asked me to take over and watch the doll when she died, since there was no one else to take over. Not anyone who would believe what me and her believed about the doll. I hesitantly agreed, but only because I believed her, and I believed what I'd seen and heard while I was in the temple. I've been watching over the doll since I was 20 years old, ever since the old lady in the village passed on to the next life. Hiro has now said he's watching over the doll and keeps it locked away in a very safe, secure place. There's only ever been one picture released of the doll by Hiro. It's the picture being used in this video. Please subscribe and share.